Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefights podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today.
What if some of the most important evidence at the scene is exactly the thing you're most likely to walk straight past? Today's episode is one of those conversations that genuinely changes the way you see the world around you. Today I'm joined by Dr. Mark Spencer. Mark is a consultant and forensic botanist who has been working on criminal investigations since 2011, supporting police forces and forensic service providers all across the UK. His expertise sits in interpreting vegetation, pollen, soil flora, and environmental evidence to understand human activity. Crucially important to us because it includes things like missing person searches, body recovery, burial, and deposition sites, and the analysis of trace evidence. Mark's worked on hundreds of criminal investigations, spanning murder, violent and sexual assaults, arson, burglary, and way more, and brings a level of insight that most of us simply haven't been exposed to. Alongside that, he spent 12 years at the Natural History Museum in London, and now co-chairs the Forensic Science Regulator's Non-Human Biology Specialist Group. And this really matters because, if we're honest, when most of us think of forensics, we think of it as fingerprints, DNA, CCTV, phone data maybe. Mark works in a very different space, a space where a disturbed patch of ground, a broken stem, a cluster of fungi, or even a trace of pollen found on someone's clothing or their shoe can help tell a story. Maybe it tells us where someone's been. Maybe it tells us what happened. And in some cases, it'll even tell you how long a person's been there. This conversation goes into missing persons, clandestine burial sites, trace evidence, and the role the natural world can play in helping investigators, search teams, and first responders understand what's happened at the scene. What really stood out to me is how much evidence can really be missed simply because people don't know what they're looking for and they don't know what they're looking at. We haven't been trained to think like this. And that should really make everyone pause. Because really, this conversation isn't just about botany. It's about awareness. It's about investigation. And ultimately, it's about doing a better job for the victims and their families. This episode is part of our mini-series brought to you in partnership and collaboration with the Blue Light Show team. The Blue Light Show returns to the London Olympia on the 1st and 2nd of July, 2026, and I'm going to be there. It brings together thousands of professionals from across police, fire, ambulance, rescue, and public protection with a strong focus on real instant learning, collaboration, leadership, and practical professional development. That is exactly why I'm going to be there again this year, and it's exactly why you should be there. So together we can be listening, we can be learning, we can having those conversations and continuing to develop our own thinking alongside people who are pushing this space forward. Mark will also be speaking at this year's event. He will be delivering a keynote on forensic botany and also chairing a panel on biological and environmental intelligence in modern investigations. And after this conversation, you'll understand exactly why he's worth listening to and why it's worth hitting to this year's Blue Light Show. This is my conversation with Dr. Mark Spencer. I'll see you on the other side. How do you describe to people what you do?
I kind of jokingly refer to it as the botany of despair, because I actually specialize not only in forensics, but also in the past, climate change and biodiversity loss and how we're trashing the planet. So that's the kind of entree is, I tend to work in realms of the natural world where things are going wrong. But in
realms of the natural world where things are going wrong. God, it sounds like an introduction to Lord of the Rings or something.
It feels a bit like it sometimes, and I see the kind of calamity that's in front of me. Yeah. But it's probably fair to say more focusing on forensics itself. And this is a bit people are like, what? Because people expect botanists to talk about plants and things like that. Is I work mainly on serious violent crime, and I do things like missing person body searches. And then when people are found, I will look for traces of information about how long they've been there and things like that, and trace evidence. So those are the core areas I work on. They're usually particularly violence against women and children, and clandestine burials in forests, for examples. But forensic botany covers a wider range of things. I also have done, I do quite often do interpreting what's happened with suicides, road traffic accidents, fraud investigations, money laundering, tax evasion, child welfare, veterinary health, illegal trade in endangered species, and the list goes on. So it's pretty diverse.
So let's I want to start from step one and move through, so we're not missing, mostly myself, in any cognitive leaps, and certainly anyone that's following along with it. So when most of us think about, let's start with forensics. So when most people think about forensics, if I played word association game, I'd be saying fingerprints, DNA, I'd maybe say CCTV. What is the big gap between maybe people's interpretations of 30 years ago? Because even DNA only, that, when did that come in? Just 40 years ago now? Was DNA to start getting used?
30,
I know they use it historically
in the
now
context of human DNA, and that in itself is a big gap.
Here we go.
There's
and this is what I'm saying.
So stuff around
start forking
DNA,
off from these threads for me, and try to expand out to the best of your ability in the limited time that I'll give you, because I'll end up interrupting what I'm like. Because I'll be like, wait a minute, what's that one?
I think we're both a pair of chatterboxes. I'm getting
good.
Sense. So people are obviously familiar with, gunshot residue, fingerprints, intelligence, mobile phone data. And probably the thing in my realm, which then pops into people's mind, will be pollen. So people will have often heard about forensic botany in the case of pollen, and how pollen can be used as trace evidence to link peoples to locations. So for non-botanists, they're like, what's pollen? So the stuff that goes up your nose and makes you sneeze is frankly, it's the male reproductive part of plants. It's the boy bit.
The only pollen joke I know, sorry, I've just got to say, because it's good to head. When you see it on the news and they go, oh, the pollen count for today. And I'm like, imagine that guy's job. He's standing on a hill somewhere. Yeah. And he's like, 1, 2.
Yes,
oh,
that's a lot of virility in the air.
Crap joke. Sorry, blokes.
Yeah.
Forensic botany. That's crazy.
We'd be very naughty, aren't we? So that's probably the thing that people are familiar with, is that.
I don't think people are even familiar with that.
There's a little.
I mean,
people are very, very into forensics, and they're a bit of a like watching their true life crime stuff and things like that. That'll be the one thing around my realm they'll have heard of. That pollen has been used.
So go deeper into that one, because I know I'm interrupted straight away. I'm terrible. Pollen. Go deeper into that one for me. So can these be specific? I imagine they're specific to both nation, region.
This is one of the great
could you go down on that?
Of biology and nature. So pollen, they aren't all just little bags floating in the air. Different plant species have different shaped surfaces to their pollen grain. So if you imagine a little grain of sugar that's then maybe covered with spikes or lines or holes and patterning, each one of those patterned surfaces and shapes will tell a pollen specialist, a palynologist, what type of pollen that is. And therefore, as there are about 350,000 species of plant on the planet that have pollen, that in itself is a lot of data. So in Britain, we have 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 plant species out in our landscape and gardens.
Significantly less.
And in many cases, those pollen types will be highly localized, because pollen comes, broadly speaking, into two main types. We have wind-dispersed pollen, which is the stuff that annoys us. That's the stuff that gives us hay fever, and that'll be coming from grasses and trees, principally, that have tiny flowers. And that type of pollen is really widely dispersed across the landscape. For example, oak tree pollen has been recorded 400 kilometers away from the parent tree. So wind-dispersed pollen is not very good at localizing where somebody's been.
Yeah.
Whereas insect dispersed pollen, which is basically the stuff you get off plants with pretty flowers that you can see, yellow, pink, white, purple, blue, it's heavier and clumpier because it has to stick to the insect.
Yeah. And that's the one that ruins your clothes.
Yeah, and that doesn't trap. Yeah, so the stuff if you buy a bunch of lilies and it smears over you, you'll know your nice white shirt is ruined forever. That heavy, clumpy pollen doesn't move very far. It sits close to the parent plant, so it's very localizable and is useful for trace evidence. One of the other amazing things about pollen is that it's very, very durable. It's one of the most persistent natural substances on the planet. It's a thing called sporopollenin, is the outer casing. And so if you have you've gone into a wood and you've committed a crime, and you've picked up pollen maybe on your jacket or your footwear or your spade that you've done the bad thing with, that will persist as a record of where you've been.
So try and bring in a knuckle dragging thread from my world here. Is that the argument why people should have local honey as well? Just to I'm trying to map some of my thing. When people say you have local honey and it won't give you hay fever, is that part of that same argument?
I don't really know.
Is that why honey lasts really long as well? Because
I think one of the good things about localism, honey can last for centuries if it's looked after properly.
I didn't know that.
Really robust structure. Yeah. It can last a really, really long time. It degrades, but it can last an incredibly long time because of the nature of the sugars and the other things in it. I'm not a honey expert, or actually, frankly, a pollen expert. But localism is really often is about sustainability. If you've actually brought stuff from New Zealand, that's a lot of air miles and a lot of carbon. Yeah. So a lot of the ideas around localism are also about sustainability.
Okay.
There probably are also things around fits for the local environment, which I'm not an expert in.
So when we go into the localities that you say, like in the UK, there's 3,000 to 4,000 different types of pollen, just to keep going further down this rabbit hole for a second.
Yeah.
That probably, when you then get into the localism, not probably, hence your job, it definitely would add a tremendous likelihood differential to narrowing down individuals in terms of locality of area, because people that commit crimes, I would imagine, are typically less aware of the sort of advances in academia. I'm trying to say that in the politest possible sense. Don't offend any criminals. But like, they would probably be more conscious about the DNA bit and the don't touch things and don't get the blood on things and whatever it might be, or accelerants and being careful about getting these on my clothes and what washes them out. Something like pollen and botany really was probably something I'm definitely completely unaware of this until I came across you, and I was like, Jesus Christ, what a fascinating area of study that most people are probably completely unaware of.
Yeah. One thing is that you can never entirely predict how daft somebody's going to be while they're committing a crime. The amount of cases I worked on where somebody's had their mobile phone in their pocket is quite extraordinary. And so, but one of the things again about pollen is it's very difficult to avoid because it's everywhere. So if you have gone into a woodland, or if you've picked up a small amount of soil, and that soil will have the pollen trace in it, because pollen is basically what we refer to as a form of trace evidence. Okay. In the case of botany, it's the most well known of to a non-botanist. That will persist and is a very, very good record of where somebody's been. So even if you're aware, people can make mistakes. This is one of the things is, even if you plan a crime and think and consider, in the moment, many, many people make mistakes because even bad people are human. And that moment you make one decision in your series of kind of thinking about what you're going to do, and you've, in this case, maybe picked up a small speck of soil. All the soil needs to be is probably, fraction of a teaspoon, a tiny, tiny amount, and that will have hundreds, if not thousands, of pollen grains in it, depending on what's in it, many, and as well as the soil itself, because soil is a really valuable tool in forensic ecology and environmental forensics. And I work very often with soil scientists, for example.
I was about to say, I imagine soil as well, because of the locality of type of crop and farm and what chemicals are in the local regions, underground movement of rivers and all of this jazz.
One of the things with Britain is we have, one of the reasons that we're in a really good position in Britain around forensic botany and forensic soil science, for example, is we've got some of the most detailed and sophisticated mapping of the distribution of wild plants, in my case, and also underlying soil geology, rock types, etc., is probably, I'd say without a doubt, the most detailed and sophisticated anywhere on the planet of things. So we've got a really powerful tool in this country for putting, for example, soil science data with botany data and archaeological data, as well as the more traditionally significant things that people think of in serious crime investigation. Obviously, witness statements, but mobile phone data, ANPR, etc. These are
well, this
additive
stuff's so
tools
hard to fluff
court.
with as well.
Yeah.
Your stuff is harder to fluff with. Because
it's a very difficult thing to fake.
Yeah, significantly so.
I've actually not seen anybody
something and back track this.
I've not seen anybody try and fake it. People often try and fake things with mobile phones and other things like that, take weird circuitous routes to avoid ANPR. As yet, who knows? Because obviously humans are amazingly inventive. We've not had a case of anybody trying to create false environmental data and trace evidence in a crime scene.
But even if you didn't pick something up from where you went, you'd have something on you from where you've come from. Do you know what I'm saying?
I do.
The other side of it.
Is proving
because I'm like, I'm going to use an old pair of boots from my shed, which have been in my garden. I'm walking around the local places doing dog walking for the last 15 years.
We have had 1 or 2 So
are you able to give insight in them with as clever as a manner as you possibly can?
Because we do have a few secrets up our sleeve.
I'm sure.
We have means in certain respects for looking at time framing and validating those kind of things. So there's quite a well-known case involving fungal spores, actually. This was a piece of work done by a woman called Patricia Wiltshire, who's very well known and eminent in the field, and her husband, David Hawksworth, who's a mycologist, a fungus expert. And this particular case involved a couple, a man and a woman, who'd been in consensual relationship for time period beforehand. And the woman then stated that he had violently sexually assaulted her. Unfortunately for the police, they both acknowledged that earlier on that day, they'd had consensual relations, and therefore the police could not use the traditional approach of DNA. Stuck, because obviously both were saying, it's going to be there. The woman stated that basically the crime occurred, I think, somewhere like a football pitch or a sports field on the edge of a village or a small town. The man said, no, I hadn't been any. And he was obviously to a good degree forensically aware. He said, I did go for a walk in the local woodland because he was aware of the fact they were going to seize his footwear. And the footwear had in the tread of the soles soil. So basically, scientists had analysed the soil from the footwear and compared it with both of their stories. And the fungal spore community in the soil on his footwear was a match for her statement. And when he was presented with that information, he changed his plea and pleaded guilty.
Wow.
So little tiny things can actually have very, very powerful.
I'm thinking, because when we started talking, and you said one of the first things I think you said is you do a lot of stuff. I'm sorry if I'm misquoting you, around domestic violence, domestic abuse, and rape and sexual assault. I imagine these things. Well, I'm just thinking back from A, cases I've read, B, how it's portrayed in films and media and things like that. It often is like someone on a walk with someone being chased into an area, people where they are alone in parks being set upon by someone with, insidious
means. It's also, the domestic scenario, when particularly crimes against women and children that involve either control, coercive behavior, or power, or sexual violence. Those, if they've happened in the domestic space, the perpetrator very nearly always wants to get the victim away. So many of the cases.
When they've killed them, sorry.
Yeah, they've ended up.
Must be hard for sexual assault ones because everybody's DNA is all over the house already.
That one, obviously, because the DNA, particularly within domestic environment, but quite often I'll be dealing with cases where somebody has been put into a woodland or a space away from the home and hidden. And so that's kind of where, again, potentially trace evidence and other forms of information to show how the perpetrator did what they did, when they did it, for example, and other things depending on.
When they did it?
Sometimes. Because quite often,
Because botany is seasonal, obviously.
Well, the natural world is seasonal, so we can use a number of kind of clues to look at timeframes. And broadly speaking, say, for example, when you have a deceased person, say, in a shallow grave or a deposition, the first thing that people will be really interested in is forensic entomology, is using insects, blowflies, and other things which arrive on our body very soon after we've died. They lay their eggs, they start eating us because we are part of nature, whether we like it or not. And scientists.
How soon after does that happen? So is the theory that starts to happen in the home?
In a few minutes. So outside in the landscape, many studies have shown, blue bottles and other kind of specialist organisms that feed off dead meat will find us very, very quickly. They can smell the chemistry changes in the air, and they will find us very fast, and they lay their eggs, and all those little crevices that we have. And then they
so the ones that would have existed in the home will have placed their fly DNA, for want of a better description.
Sometimes, again, there's some interesting stuff around flies and DNA, but I can't go into that. But yeah, so you'll find whether it's in the home, again, even unless the house is really sealed airtight, flies will get in and find a deceased person. So one of the things about that is what the scientists do is we collect the larvae, and they get sent to specialists who then dissect and examine the larvae and look at how far developed they are. Are they 1 day, 2 days, 5 days, 10 days, 20 days, 30 days? And that can provide a really, really fantastic time frame for the first few days and weeks. Forensic botany overlaps a bit. My area tends to be the kind of weeks, months, and years for time framing how long somebody's been in the landscape. But there's also actually some really, really fascinating work developing around what's called the necrobiome and microbial DNA. So when you die, whether you like it or not, the bacteria in your body start eating you. And different types of bacteria eat you at different rates because different bits of you are tasty for different types of bacteria. That creates a chronology, a time frame. So there's some really interesting studies around actually looking at bacterial activity within our remains to time frame for the first few hours and days to actually help understand how long we've been dead for. So the non-human.
I'd be really interested in that. We've been to a number, certainly during COVID, we went to suicides and also a lot of bariatrics who had unfortunately passed away in their homes and we'd been asked to come and gain entry for the ambulance.
I've been trying to give advice around that kind of stuff, and it's really difficult.
And because they'll say to me, I'll have to put my own report in and go, how long was it dead for? I'm like, I'm literally just throwing my finger in the air. Because from my remarkably narrow, I've been to probably 20 or so over my career, but still.
You develop a hive knowledge and understanding, don't you?
Hive knowledge is, but how much of that is based on the wrong information already?
Yeah.
I'm developing a hive knowledge, but I've not had any of it validated. Because at no point has someone like you, or even, because we don't know what happens to them after they go off in the ambulance, unless your friend is a paramedic and you go, hey, what happened to that dude that we had the car crash? We don't know. So you can guess. But no one goes, oh, by the way, you were bang on. Or by the way, you were like weeks out. Yeah. So I think we develop a false competency, we being Fire and Rescue Service. And I don't know how much.
All of us. There's actually.
I don't know. I think the police probably get more of an insight. They maybe see the thread of the investigation continue.
There's remarkably little empirical scientific data that shows how long it takes, for example, for somebody to decompose, which is called the scientific study of taphonomy, how we break down and become part of the natural world. And there are very few taphonomic studies that are really, really directly applicable to actually decomposition rates in the UK. I'm actually part of
a different climate, isn't it?
Scientists that we really, really need a facility. What's often referred to as a body farm. For example, in Tennessee, there's a very globally famous one. Myself and other people in the science community, forensic anthropologists, archaeologists, entomologists, and other disciplines, and fire scientists actually, are very keen on us
contributing
having a research facility. To actually study more robustly, because a lot of it is basically built on peer community experience and knowledge, with a few little areas where we do have more robust data, such as forensic entomology, where the data is very valuable. But forensic entomology doesn't always work because it's only in a particular time frame, and on occasion, for example, if somebody's buried deeply in a woodland or other things have happened to them, the insects don't get to them. I worked on a case recently with a person, the deceased was put in a grave and they had petrol thrown on them in an attempt to destroy their body. The petrol ignited, and as you'll know, as a fire specialist, it flared, and basically the surface of the body was singed and the rest of the body was fine. But the residual petrol remained in the space. And so in this particular landscape, flies were coming in because they could smell from the distance dead person. But as they got closer to the burial, the petrol fumes were basically sending out they were knocking them out, and they literally were just flying around in circles and then just going because they couldn't work out what was what. And so this person was very, very unusually, not uniquely, but unusually, had none of the decomposition that we expect from entomology, for example.
Yeah.
Which is why we need to learn more.
Well, yeah, that makes me think of, when they not just embalm bodies, but when they fill them with, what's the fluid they fill them with?
Embalming fluid. Yeah.
Embalming fluid, yeah. Highly volatile
really
substance.
Nasty stuff, yeah.
Yeah, but obviously very effective for that specific purpose. But again, I know certainly from an accelerant's perspective, all of these leave very, very clear patterns as well.
Yeah.
How long do those, sorry to go down a slightly fire-specific route just for a second, but how long do those traces last in organic matter? If I were to spill things through a woodland, if I went to someone's home to set fire to it and had traces of that following me through it, because I don't know how long that, I don't think it lasts.
I think one of the things is, again, we probably don't know, and I suspect probably a fire scientist would clearly know far more about this. But, hydrocarbons are a part of the natural world.
Okay.
And the natural world in different ecosystems is full of organisms that are really good at breaking down hydrocarbons. So bacteria and fungi, for example, will have different types of organism of those groups in different woodlands, different wetlands, different grasslands, different streets, which will have a different impact on the breakdown of hydrocarbons. I mean, again, people, we think of the man-made world as being separate from the natural world. But one of my favorite stories about how organisms adapt to humanity is there's a fungal organism, I've forgotten his name, which it feeds off aircraft fuel. And
no way, aviation fuel.
And it is actually a significant risk.
Because they've got tiny hydrocarbons. The particulates for aviation fuel is tiny.
It feeds off the petrol, or whatever the aviation fuel is. Not very good at this stuff. And it clogs the pipes. And it's actually, in the past, it's caused air crashes.
No way.
They have to put fungicide, I think, in it. Or do they do something to control it now? So
I'm going to stack that in my little brain, because in about 3 weeks' time, I'm doing the Aviation Fire Chiefs Association, AFOA, Aviation Fire Officers Association. I'm going to ask them about that, because they're struggling with things around decontamination, because the particulates of aviation fuel are so much smaller than standard carcinogens and particulates in other, like asbestos as an example is massive. It's
like smokeless fuel in homes, and smokeless stoves have now been shown that the particulates coming off them are mega micro and really dangerous. So,
and the things that we put in historically to protect you,
they're really bad.
Yeah. That's why I think for us, when we look back historically at like fire investigators and people who used to go into or still go into scenes for investigative purposes post-fire, the amount of exposure they've had to toxins accidentally back then, but now, I'm not so far as to think they shouldn't be wearing self-contained breathing apparatus, even just going in these environments. And I say the same for police investigation, because we're kind of fireys, we go in and do the thing, but then a police officer needs to get in there because they've got overall authority in that environment.
Us forensic practitioners as well, I've been in quite a few locations which health and safety have been
still gassing off.
We've got the things we need to do, But we've also got to get this body out.
Yeah.
Again, people are quite surprised that I actually am at the front end, the coal face, because they perceive scientists as being in a laboratory wearing a white lab coat. But 2/3 of my casework probably involves being right at the front end, helping recover the body, and
because we can do so much
areas.
damage and ruin so much evidence.
One of the things I often talk about is challenges around how people are in policing and forensics are used to their normal areas. So policing is very used to mobile phone data, ANPR, gunshot, and all the other typical human forensic things. But in a complex forensic environment, say such as a clandestine burial in a woodland, most people, even if they're incredibly experienced, they might have 20, 30 years under their belt as a forensic practitioner or as a senior detective, they walk into that space, and that could be maybe the first or second time they've ever been in a landscape like this with a murder victim in front of them. And they quite often just lose the plot. You can see them going, what do we do? Because it's just not something they're used to processing professionally and experientially as human beings, because we're so urban these days.
Yeah.
So we quite often spend a bit of time holding their hands metaphorically and coaxing them through what we're going to do. And it is really, really important, depending on the circumstances, to avoid damage, because quite often, for example, if you've got a person who's they're in a clandestine burial or maybe just lying on the ground and the police don't know who they are, time frame information is invaluable. So if I can get in there and do what I do and go, this person has been here for between 7 and 8 years, for example, the police only have to search that set of data for missing person records as opposed to doing 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
Because anthropology generally doesn't, so bones, human bones, they generally don't do anything on time framework. So they'll say, yes, this is a person. They'll say, yes, this person is potentially male or female. Yes, it's got a gunshot damage to the skull or other things that can be seen through the pathology and the damage on the remains. But they generally don't pronounce on time frames.
Really?
Yeah.
Is that just that's why, because bones preserve themselves so very well. They just don't
there are kind of
break
there's
down.
some interesting kind of perspectives around why they don't, and I'm not an anthropologist. Get an anthropologist on to explain that properly, as opposed to my outsider's view. So I'm probably one of the first, along with archaeology, we're probably some of the first people at a scene who will provide an indication of a time frame, and all it needs is for search team to come through with their sticks and their chopping implements, or a detective to walk past and knock something physically out of context, and that time frame is gone forever and we lose data. And it's quite a widespread problem in policing in this country, and it's something we're very used to dealing with. Sometimes the damage can be minor, sometimes it's catastrophic.
Missing persons, we've tilted our head towards that a few times. This is a very much a growing area of concern around society in general. I think people feel very lost, lots of mental health concerns, rumination, people wandering off, maybe seeking to leave this world, or just I don't know why, but it's becoming significant. Police, first responders, and other voluntary agencies are spending a lot of time doing this. How can this area of study aid, and has aided clearly already, in missing persons cases?
So I think there's probably two ends to this. I'll talk about the first end of the initial investigation. Where are they? Now, it's fair to say quite often, because missing person cases will sometimes be lower priority, the resources are not necessarily there, and maybe even the forensic potential is not there in the first end, but potentially if you have a high-risk missing person and maybe you've got a suspect, for example, and you have a suspect's vehicle, that may well have trace evidence in that could link to a missing person and provide to a new location where that person might be. So some of that kind of recovering trace evidence in the homes, on the properties of people where resources and prioritization allow. But one of the things I quite often do is really, really frankly, quite tragically, is the other end. is working on providing an understanding of what's happened to that person after they've died, whether it be through suspicious circumstances, whether it's a murder or accidental death and/or suicide. And quite often, again, the forensic botany provides a novel insight that maybe policing experts are not used to. Probably the case that really sticks in my mind was a person who was considered high risk. They'd been missing for about 18 months. There were questions around their partner. As it turned out, in the end, the partner there was nothing suspicious about their behavior at all. But through the process of investigation, they were concerned the partner had done something the partner had not.
It is the statistics are quite high that the people that kill you are someone you already know, though, isn't it?
Even from a probabilistic thing, when you see.
But that can lead us into that bias, can't it?
Yeah. And again, I think there potentially was that. And the police were very careful to manage that. They said there were questions, but we're managing our process and behavior around this. But the person essentially had mental health problems, and their remains were found about 20 kilometers from their home in a woodland, middle of nowhere. And myself and my colleague, it was middle of December. It was chucking it down with rain. It was freezing cold. It was horrible. Everything was an absolute marsh. At one point, the rain got so heavy that a new stream formed through the wood, through the place where we were trying to recover the deceased, and into the scene tent and out the other side. So I had to grab a spade and start digging a stream trench to get all the water out. It was literally, our equipment was starting to float away. It was mental. Anyway, returning to the deceased, as we stood there initially, the police were like, "Oh, the dead person in front of them." They're very focused on that. They're pretty much charging everybody to get on with the recovery. And I'm like, "Stop! There's something going on here." And they're like, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "There's a construction around this person's body." And because it was the depths of winter, the leaf litter was over partially their remains, but everything else around them. So we gradually removed all the leaf litter, and the person had created their own space for dying. They had collected branches from the woodland and had made, with long branches, essentially the outline of a bed frame. They'd then collected ivy stems and twigs, and they'd made a pillow for themselves. And they lay down on the ground, took the pills, and died. And so, a lot of that is also, as you know, it's about providing understanding for family and friends about what's happened to their loved one. That is one of the most important parts of what we do.
The biggest thing about trauma is when it's out of context, when your mind has gaps in this story. And that's from my working with people that have helped people find a place for trauma or make sense of trauma. It's because there's gaps in their memory, or they're stuck in a loop, because the mind hates open loops, doesn't it? It can't deal with open loops. It has to form a structure. That's why we patchwork most of our memory together with made up stuff, because we can't really remember it. So we but you're right, like giving the family that element of closure, because there's just so many what ifs when a close one takes their own life, isn't there?
Yeah. And I really find, frankly, it's one of the most rewarding things I do is, even if sometimes the piece of work I'm doing is not evidentially valuable, sometimes it is, but sometimes it's not, but actually just framing and understanding what's happened to that person and how it's happened I think is really valuable. Can be valuable for the court, but it is most valuable for the family and friends.
I think it's most valuable for family and friends, but I think it's probably also very valuable for seeking to help people in these situations, because you can start to build story arcs or behaviors and patterns of what people tend to do. We're working in collaboration with the Blue Light Show, a national conference and exhibition built around one thing: blue light services do better together than apart. I'm going to be there 1st and 2nd of July 2026 at the event, getting involved with those conversations and connecting with people who really care about doing the job better across the blue light sector. I'll see you there.
I do quite a lot of work on vegetation in terms of interpreting how they have physically moved around the crime scene and the landscape. And again, that helps the detectives understand how the crime has occurred. Damage to vegetation patterns will show points of entry, potentially timeframes around that, and maybe with really complex crimes, other activities around that. And so, again, vegetation can provide, and landscape and archaeology, because I work a lot with archaeologists as well, is understanding the landscape as it was before the crime occurred, and interpreting the human activity can provide a real understanding for the investigative team about what's happened. Looking for subtle signs for things like grave markers. Quite often, again, police detectives are not very good at looking at vegetation and seeing a plant being out of place or branches out of place. Obviously, search team tend to have more experience of that. More.
They'll have a keener eye for it. Sorry, that was
they definitely.
disrespectful
Again,
sort of
there's
look,
some really, there's some really, really interesting synergies between different disciplines. I fairly often go up to the College of Policing whenever I can and talk to people at the National Search Centre, both the military people embedded within there and also police people, and we've got a strong bond of understanding how our respective disciplines are actually really mutually informative when it comes to missing person searches, etc. And so it's quite yin and yang. It works really nicely together. I had an amazing military search expert. We were working on a case, and we were trying to understanding where the suspects had been through this woodland, and we were like two little 6-year-old boys in a woodland together going, oh, look at that, that's really cool. And coming from his kind of military kind of perspective and sightlines and things like that, and me looking at upside down leaves, providing real interesting.
That's a book. That is you two solving crimes together. That's a book, mate.
We were. I know it's kind of weird to say, but we were like kids in a sweet shop in this particular case, because it is. But it's it's charming, but also it's really important, because no expertise lives in a bubble. It has to feed off and understand each from other disciplines and actually get stronger through that. So I learned loads just from being with him.
The route that you mentioned that was one of the first things I ever remember really sticking in my mind when there had been maybe a fire death or one of significant financial loss or an attempted murder, manslaughter, whatever it might be, people stacking things up against houses, setting fire to them, or breaking entry into houses and setting fire with people in them, was the access route. I remember one of the fire investigators showing me a photo of a ladder to the side of a house and saying to people, what's this ladder for? And we're looking at the house and we can see the burn pattern around the front door, and the door was open and there was burn all through. And we're like, no one could work it out. And it's obviously one of his little mic drop moments where it was like, as soon as you just even start to have an inkling that there is foul play, stop using the most obvious route of access that you would normally use if you were entering this area, this undergrowth, this farm, this house. Because what we typically do is, like in buildings, we'll do the thing in the building. Then we might set up a fan in front of it, or we throw down a salvage sheet, which has been at 5,700 other
activity has been.
We'll spill accelerants. We'll have oil and things from a road traffic collision 7 days ago on this sheet that we've laid on the ground. And he was like, just cut it off and use an annoying alternative entrance if you absolutely feel you need to, because you look at it and go, what a ball ache that is, flipping climbing up that ladder. Or people have they've cut through fences to get access into another area so that they're not using the main entrance of this thing.
So important. Again, from my perspective, because of this idea of what we refer to in the world of botany as plant blindness, policing, and humans not seeing the green stuff, the damage by following, and clearly it's just not good practice anyway, following existing footpaths through woodlands or going through the front door or through the kitchen window, in your case, for example, are really bad ideas, because you are putting your imprint over everything that's already there in the first place. And I have seen over the years a few horror shows where forces they're less so now, thankfully, use pre-existing footpaths through woodlands to get to the deposition.
I've literally got one just like that. So there was someone
that was dead in their bathroom, and there'd been some accelerant used in the house as well. So we'd been there. Well, this wasn't a job I was on. It was a story I was being told at a fire investigation course. But I'll tell it in the first person. So the fire service had been there, and the fire service had discovered the body. They'd left the body, and obviously the police arrived. They'd handed over to the police, and the story arc in the report was that the incident commander and 2 police officers had been in the place where in the bathroom. How many sets of footprints with blood on them do you think they found?
Well, incident commander says at least 3 additional ones.
16.
Oh!
And one of them one of them they were really interested in went down to the bottom of the garden with blood on it. And they went, oh, no. Do you know who that was? One of the police officers going for a wee.
Yeah,
at the bottom of the garden.
I think we all have those horror stories, don't we, about how.
Mate.
And again, I think one of the things
around this is, I'm just saying.
I mean, we can finger wave at individuals, but I think it reflects a really massive problem we have in policing in this country is lack of training and awareness. Yeah. You know, we do not.
Well, you let people. We do it at fire. We let people in for a looky loo because we're like, so and so's new. I'll tell you what, and we don't do it anymore, but we used to do it. We'd be like.
No.
Yeah, we used to be like, hey, well, they need to see one at some point. Just take a quick look, but don't go inside. No, because again, trauma without context isn't actually useful for even the person you think you're exposing them to.
As well, you know,
it's terrible for the firefighter or the police officer, and then it's terrible for obviously investigative purposes.
Yeah, I'll give you a nice story. So I did a round, entry path horror, which was a really good one, but we had a person who'd been murdered and they were lying basically in a rubbish dump and had been partially covered with garden waste. And we were like, you can't come in this way. These are all the entry paths that people use, public space, etc. So the force were brilliant. They got their search team to cut through about 15 meters of 20-foot high bramble thicket straight through from the back end space. Nobody had been there for at least a decade. And it was a nightmare. You could hear them cussing every step of the way. But the piece of work was superb because it meant we got to the scene and it was as clean as it could possibly be in terms of secondary from following, first reporters. So it is really, really important. I think those kind of mistakes are rarer now, thankfully. I've been doing this for 15 years and it used to be fairly common. We'd have these kind of things and I'd often have to barter with the force going, no, we really do need a separate entry path. Please, let's not use the dog walker path. We need somewhere else. But again, it really comes down to training and awareness. Much of the guidance, frankly, doesn't have a huge amount of information about forensic ecology, non-human biology in crime scenes. Myself and my community were trying to get things better. So I'm actually working on behalf of the forensic science regulator on the non-human biology areas to try and improve some areas around this. And we're also working with SceneSafe on the Scenes of Crime handbook to actually improve some of the information around non-human biology.
Who are SceneSafe, sorry?
SceneSafe are the main company that provides all the forensic equipment. So basically exhibit bags, pots, knife boxes, all of those things.
So it's in their interest as well.
They have, by chance, through after the Forensic Science Service, they've got the copyright for what's called the Scenes of Crime Handbook, which is one of the core pieces of material that forensic crime scene investigators use as their guide for how to manage crime scenes. But it has all sorts of things in here which give me the horrors, which we're trying to resolve.
What's still in the handbook?
Yeah, we're trying to sort it out. I mean,
I've just written that down because I'm going to try and get hold of one of them. So I'd be interested to look at that.
Yeah. So one of my pet bugbears is, I talked on about how I do all sorts of weird and wonderful things. I do stomach content work, which is kind of revolting. So I'll get stomach contents from deceased people and we'll be looking at their last meal and picking bits of botanical material out of it to identify whether what they've eaten is just McDonald's, or was it poisonous seeds from a lethal tree?
Yeah.
And again, that's quite an important area within forensic botany. But unfortunately, the advice in most of the standard guidance, including the Scenes of Crimes Handbook and the Pathology Hand Guidance, is stomach content material should be frozen. And that is catastrophic for soft tissue, such as, say, plant material, because as it thaws, it explodes. And you lose. Well, not explodes in the sense of explode, but basically freeze-thawing causes cells to rupture and burst. So I don't mean explode in your realm. Yeah. And, if you put a lettuce in a freezer and then get it out afterwards and thaw it, it goes shbloomf, and it becomes a mess, doesn't it? And that means identifying plant material becomes much, much, much harder. So we're trying to.
So that's probably like an accidental attempt at efficiency due to the lack of resource from people such as yourself.
They're like, really around the
we'll just freeze it
and
we'll come back to it later.
Pathologists traditionally are interested in potentially DNA and or chemistry, and those things are stable to freezing. Whereas plant anatomy, so again, it's your biases and where you come from in disciplines, which is again comes back to the earlier point I made about why it's so important to actually listen to your peers in the process of working in policing and forensics, and learn where something for you makes entirely good sense, doesn't work at all for other people, or just learn things. I had my fire scientist friend. We were working on a really complex case involving burning of wood in a complex landscape. And we were both kind of coming at these burn sites from our two disciplines. One of the things I was doing was actually looking at the burn sites and how the vegetation growth around the burn could help provide a time frame for how long the burn site was, how old it was. Because imagine if you burn something, it kills all the vegetation around it, and then depending on how many weeks, months, or years, the vegetation grows back in or to the edge of that space. Even subtle things like seedlings growing on the centre of the burn site can give you an indication of how old the burn site is. But during this process, we were kind of investigating, looking at some other, she pointed to some black charring on a piece of wood, and she went, that looks interesting. And I was like, that's not burning, it's a fungus. Because there are 2 or 3 fungi, it's called charcoal crust or burnt crust. Its scientific name is Kreutzmaria deusta.
And I was going to say that, but I didn't know if you knew it.
Yeah. And it grows on the surface of dead trees and dead wood, and it creates a blackening, brittle mat that looks a bit like charcoal until you look at it closely. And she was like, and then she looked at it and went, "Oh, you're right, it's not." Because,
I bet that is common misconception.
Yeah. And we were literally,
because we get a lot of arson in the open. Obviously, people, kids burning stuff in parks and everything like that.
So quite often, I've seen it on quite a few occasions. We working through a woodland, looking for old burn sites, for example, as part of maybe a clandestine burial, or trying to burn clothing as part of the process of clearing up the crime. And the investigator will point to these blackened pieces of wood and go, "Here's a burn site." I'm like, "No, it's fungus. It's not."
Mate, I think you're going to have to do all this work again, though, because it's not. So it sounds as though you do a tremendous amount of training and awareness around the sort of first responder and also military sectors, by the sounds of it. But if it doesn't make it into training, because I'm sitting at the other end of the sausage machine, I'm an operational watch manager on a fire station.
Yeah,
mate. Half an hour of input on this accidentally, probably due to my own professional curiosities outside of the actual job. Has any of this been related? It will come through as a small percentage of our investigators' work, because it may not feel like in the limited time they have to do this piece of awareness. That's why I was so fascinated with speaking to you, because something like this, because the ultimate losers are the victims, either the deceased or the families of, because we just can't put the pieces that you can't put Humpty Dumpty back together after all the other well-intentioned first responders have kicked the hell out of these sites, or just accidentally taken action that ruins your job. And I just think that this has got to find its way into a lot more training and awareness.
We're trying.
But it must be very hard to find an expert like you because it's such a unique area of study, which is not maybe super popular at university. I don't know.
I had quite a few friends.
No, I'm sure you did, but I mean, you're the first one I've met. I've met thousands of people over my life.
I mean, you can't train to be a forensic botanist. There is no course on how to become a forensic botanist.
That's part of the problem.
I fell into it by accident. I used to work at the Natural History Museum as a museum curator, and I just got called, Dr. Spencer, can you help us? And so there's no professional roots. Going back to the kind of problem is that really budgets, lack of training capacity and stuff like that is a really significant problem. And some cultural biases in certain parts of policing. One of the things I find is quite often when I have a direct experience with a senior detective or a crime scene team, they're like, wow, we really, really get it and we really understand it and we utilize it. So
is that becoming more common? Or
so I work all
having
across
to
England
professionally
and Wales.
not offend them by saying, look, you don't really know what you're on about. Please listen to me.
People find this quite funny. I'm notoriously undiplomatic in my personal life, and my family and friends are always like, how do you manage to not cause offence?
Yeah, how do you manage these big egos that you work with? Because there's people there with lots of
you can imagine.
bird poo on the shoulders.
Yeah, you have to be really gentle, which is why, even though I can point out the problem, I'm very, very aware of actually saying, it isn't directly the person's fault. I mean, sometimes it is, but a lot of the time it's around awareness and training. A lot of this is frankly to do with the Home Office, Ministry of Justice, and College of Policing. Their large-scale societal priorities blur out and overshadow other things which are significant, or they don't understand them. There's a national kind of focus on cybercrime and what government and policing sees as big data. And again, there's some real biases around actually seeing people in front of computers or doing things with technology as real science. And flower huggers like me is not. And one of the things
it's almost the perfect example of Hanlon's razor, where it's never attribute to malice that which can adequately be explained as stupidity. You're like, you're intentionally getting in my way. No, you don't know what you don't know. Yeah. You just don't know what you don't know. It's not conscious malice of hatred or trying to ruin something.
But, the natural world can provide, I keep saying to people, we provide and have big data. The biological resources in this country through natural history museums.
I was about to say, because you're standing on the shoulders of giants, which have studied these areas.
Millions and millions of data points, which provide huge amount of information for provenancing landscape. I've made the argument within the Home Office, for example, the biological data is also relevant for things like global crime, people trafficking, drug smuggling, et cetera, because a lot of what they need to do through intelligence mainly at the moment and cybersecurity and things like that is find out where things are coming from. But where people move through the world, going back to what I said earlier on, they pick up signals of where they've come from and where they've been.
Mate, we've had a couple of instances of drug growths next to motorways. So next to motorways in heavy undergrowth, they'll have tapped into a CCTV camera on the motorway and used that to feed, growths of whatever, I don't know, probably cannabis or marijuana or something, I don't know what it is, but little drug growths in these areas. And they'll be pulling into lay-bys. So we found like a pipe underneath all of this undergrowth that fed just next to the steel stanchion at this thingy bob. And they were coming with like an IBC of water every whatever, but this specific lay-by wasn't covered by CCTV, but they managed to track the vehicle. But when I first got there, it was just someone reported fire in the undergrowth. So I went down and went, oh, it's a bloody grow. Do you know what I mean? So we're trying to get our hose reels down there. It's tough. There's not a lot of space to move in. And I probably ruined the whole scene, to be fair. Because then I'm standing around waiting for police and I'm like, oh, you'd have hated me. I was like,
No, I've
because I was conscious of high voltage, and I was like, I don't want anybody to get electrocuted down here. So I started following these offshoots of cable, which went up to the CCTV thing, and then there was one that went the other way, which went for ages, and it was a pipe they were taking for water all the way up to this thing. I imagine no one like you got called for that instance because maybe it wasn't big enough grow, very common, whatever. But I'm like, there's loads of them.
Budgets play a huge part. When I first started working in the sector 15 years ago, I used to do burglary casework, less serious assaults, GBH, etc., and things like that. And burglary. So I mentioned burglary, arson. I've done arson casework in the past. That virtually never happens now because the perception around, specialist services such as myself and the others that we're too expensive, etc., etc. But certainly when it comes to
does no one employ you full time for this? Sorry,
I'm self-employed. I work for myself.
That's a bloody frustration.
Botany consultancy.
So. No, I'm not. Yeah, I'm not frustrated, and I would encourage people to bring you in for consulting and training and obviously professional work. But the fact that we don't offer full-time positions for you, even as a regional asset or a national asset, come on.
There is. One of the things that's really worrying is I'm
sure it wouldn't be worth it for you because you're very successful at doing it. But like for future people coming through the area,
with a few extra bob.
Well, it's nice to have a guaranteed one, isn't it? Yeah. But you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm astonished the amount of other, not arbitrary, but the amount of other experts, because no one sees the other cost.
No,
the cost of not doing it, and everything that we then have to pay in the background. Do you know what I mean?
Well, the cost benefits are great. I mean, I'll come to the cost benefit in a moment. But one thing I think is, we are facing a crisis in specialist forensic services in this country. We know the forensic sector is in trouble. Report after report has identified this, and we've still done nothing really. But I'm 57, and as far as I know, I'm essentially, bar one other person who's pretty much retired, I'm the only operational forensic botanist in the UK who does the range of things that I do. The
good news for you, bad news for society.
It's bad for the sector, but it's not just me. I'm not going woe is me around botany, but for example, soil science, which is really powerful data. We have one of the world's leading experts in this country, and they will be putting their feet up within the next decade, and we have no continuity and no handover. So many of these disciplines are really on a knife edge because of lack of planning and forethought from government and the relevant government departments around actually how we can ensure that experts in fields such as, my case, botany, can move safely into the realm, and safely I mean in the sense of safe for their career, into the world of forensics. I took a massive risk. I nearly left this about 6 years ago because my business was doing so badly. I wasn't getting any work. Thankfully, for various reasons, because I built up a stronger network of people like, we need Dr. Spencer. My personal business at the moment is just about viable. But I cannot hire another person to potentially actually develop and actually provide continuity. So there's huge risks there.
Yeah, that's tragic.
But the benefits, for example, one of the things I think, particularly with body searches and missing person searches, is a forensic botanist may look on the front end expensive, but I'll give you a couple of examples of actually how we can be really cost beneficial along with forensic archaeology in a search. So I quite often work alongside search advisors, and I'll chat to the pollster and go, look, we've got this piece of woodland. Your missing person is from 6 months ago. So these are the kind of signs of damage in the vegetation you need to look for. And I can also, having gone through this woodland, I can triage large chunks of the landscape and say, you don't need to search here because the vegetation is So me being able to say to that search team, right, okay, you don't need to deploy 20 people, you only need 5 of them, and only for a fraction of the time, is a big financial
enormous resource heavy search and rescue.
Because one guy is considerably cheaper than 5, 10, 20 people, and particularly on the big scene. And also, sometimes
these things go on for weeks as well.
Yeah, I mean, and sometimes my proudest moment a couple of years ago was I was on the job for a large police force, which involved a guy who had killed more than one person. And he had killed this sex worker and put her body in a car and driven her into the countryside. He had his mobile phone with him and hers. He obviously didn't worry or care about that. And also the vehicle had tracking on it. And the vehicle stopped in a lay-bar in the middle of the countryside, middle of nowhere. He was there for 2.5 hours or thereabouts. He then left. About 3 miles down the road, he stopped again for about another 30 minutes. So the police had a really clear hypothesis that he'd come up, he buried this person in the landscape, and then he'd left, and this was confirmed later, he'd then gone to this other location and he burnt the clothing and possessions and the materials in another location. So we got there, and again, this idea, the police were literally like, oh my God, we're a big urban police force, and look at all the green stuff in front of us. They had multiple hectares of woodland, farmland, grassland, arable, hedgerow, ditches, ponds, farm buildings, you name it. And they were like, what are we going to do? And so me and my colleague, we spent about 2 or 3 hours walking around the whole site with them, explaining to them our method and our approach and going, look, with this particular piece of landscape, we'll do this, we'll do that. And we'd finished the kind of the preliminary assessment. We were just about to pack up to go. I stopped. They went back to the roadside. I put myself down to write some notes and be a good boy on what we'd done. And I stood up and I just looked across the landscape, and there was a massive bed of stinging nettles in front of me. And I just thought, that looks a bit funny. And the far end, I could just see a tiny dip like that on the tops of the stinging nettle. And I then could see the hint of a fox path or a mammal, again, because often, the botany links with other things like mammals. So I followed this track through the nettles, and I got forward, and now I could see a chink of bare soil through the nettle leaves. And I thought, whoa, could feel it. And then I peered forward, and the deceased was partially exposed, and their head was just facing straight up looking at me. And I was like, oh,
Jesus.
that, like, even when you know it and expect it professionally, it's a big thing to happen in your head. So I kind of got myself back together again. I was like, wow, stepped back very carefully through the landscape, trying not to damage it, got up to the road. And one of the detectives looked at me and went, are you all right? And I went, got some good news for you. And they're like, what? And I'm like, I just found her. And they were like, and they completely lost it. The search lead came up and threw her arms around, was hugging me. He was like going, how did you do it? How did you do it? You like a voodoo magician, something like this. He was completely, for the next 2 or 3 days, he was completely dumbfounded that this is what we could do. And I
accidentally found one once.
Yeah, did you? It's quite a head thing, isn't it, when it happens?
Oh, mate, there was a lady had mental health concerns, and her husband was aware that she had attempted twice before, and we got to the house to aid the paramedics already there that were just speaking away to him and trying to get information about the medication that she was taking that was in the house and all this sort of stuff. And he switched on her like Find My iPhone or something like that. I don't know what it's something like that. And he said it was in some local woodland. So we sent another team with the police to go and just aid in like a hail and search line, because anybody can, not anybody, but like first responders will all kind of work together to do that, stand together, look left, look right, one pace, blah, 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 blah.
I've assisted in doing that.
Yeah. And I went round the back of the house just to send a message. And behind the back of the house where I opened up into the woodland, I literally walked past a sodding tree, and she was sat on my left, up against the tree.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah.
I nearly jumped out of my skin. And then called everybody back, and we started CPR and whatever. Unfortunately, she'd passed sometime that morning. But I was like, bloody hell.
Yeah.
I thought they were like, I'm like, well, I'll stay here with him, because I was in charge from a fire perspective at that time. So I send an update, tell him we're redeploying resources, blah, blah, blah. And I wanted to be out of earshot of him, because I was going to say some sensitive information. So I just wandered out into his back garden, and there was a fence at the bottom of it. And it was like, Jesus. But mate, that is crazy. But again, you said about like layers of Swiss cheese or blankets. Like,
your mind is unconsciously thrashing through a Rolodex of everything that you're seeing. Not for me in that, but like in yours, in the stinging nettles example, you're doing so much cognitive pattern recognition that someone without your experience and knowledge, because you just don't know what you're looking for. But you unconsciously, that's when people say like gut instinct and stuff like that. Oh, we can't explain it. You're like, well, you can't explain it because your mind is working way faster than your cognitive, than your prefrontal cortex can actually make sense of.
Yeah.
So you're just seeing things and going, oh, I had an instinct. And you're like, but that was based on knowledge.
Look at landscape, and because I've been looking at plants for
telling you a different
over
story.
50 years, I've got this massive library in my head of how British landscape is and should be and what's happened to it. So I can look out a window on a train and I can literally take a fling and I can give you a narrative for what's happened to that field over the last 5-10 years, just through the visual signals I can see and things like that. So again, one of the things about this, with all of us, it is experience as well as the core scientific professional acumen. And I actually quite often say to people, I've been asked to give or participate and assist in casework in Southern Europe and the Middle East, for example, and in Africa. And I've always said to people, I can give you professional advice and guidance and training and mentoring around process and how you do things. But you need on the ground somebody who has granular familiarity with that landscape, because they will read it much faster.
Just get them to pay your flights and get over there, brother. Get them experiences.
There's no money in it. I mean, there is probably, we think, probably less than 30 forensic botanists, even that, in the world. There's hardly any of us. And policing, policing don't pay.
No, bless them. Well, they're so... Well, they've got probably one of the biggest budgets, but they're also trying to solve some of the biggest societal problems at the same time.
And one case just munches through resources so fast. People are expensive, and quite rightly so. We should be paying for people. What I find really, one of the things I find really interesting about my experience over the last 15 years is how being in a space helps you understand it. We've all got in society critiques about policing and, security and things like that. And many of those critiques I have, but when you're in that space and seeing those people's experiences, you get a real okay, there are other ways of looking and understanding and seeing this. And I'm still utterly appalled by how we, in many cases, treat people in policing and forensics in terms of the quality of the facilities they're expected to work in, their positioning in society. One of the things I joke about is, or not a joke, is how virtually all police stations now are stuck at the back end of some scabby industrial estate in the middle of nowhere.
Ain't going to pay for the premium real estate, brother.
Yeah, but we talk about, politicians, etc., talk about how we need to value policing and integrate it with society. And that means we shouldn't be putting it on a pedestal. Policing should always be open to critique. But if you want it to be valued, put it in the heart of that society.
Absolutely. Saying those things is just political beach balls people bounce around. But when you say, show that we're proud of them, empower our officers, put them in a position of respect and authority and in a place where they're useful to respond to their community. If you're giving them less resources, put them bang in the middle with abundant resource to do their job. Don't under-resource them. Put them in some absolute hole and then begrudge them for doing a crap job.
Yeah, I went to one police force. I went to a HQ a few years ago on a job, and got into the basement of the HQ, and there were signs all over the basement saying "Don't feed the rats," because the place was rat infested. We got to the lift and got in, and the detective said, "Really sorry, but you might be going up to the 10th floor in the dark because the lights don't work properly in this lift." This is the HQ.
It's obscene.
So I think those are, things that I think.
I went in one the other day. They had a real mold problem.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what effect is that having on all the health of the officers working in this building that no one's really aware of?
So the mold thing is really interesting because obviously after that really important case, was it in Bradford, of the child who died in the poor quality housing?
Oh,
and it was attributed to mold death.
Sorry, that was an accidental segue, but please, I'm interested in this. Yeah.
We are actually, my doctorate's in mycology. I'm a fungal person. That's actually what my specialism is officially. We're actually getting more inquiries from local authorities and also police forces around housing and questioned death are in substandard housing and mold. And it's a bit of a kind of open Pandora's box at the moment, because actually the pathology around attributing these things to people's death or ill health are, in my understanding from talking to one or two of the leading experts in the country, quite difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And actually just doing things like explain, the quantity of mold in that and whether it's so, people say black mold, but there are a number of fungus things which are black, which grow on walls. So it's quite a complicated, and again, frankly,
does have, even
area.
from the very just general, skin deep societal perspective, though, mold does have noticeable long-term impact on people's health.
Yeah, some of them are very dangerous.
It can be like a comorbidity, if I'm probably getting my words wrong there, but that will make you significantly more vulnerable to other things.
Some of them are very dangerous. Lots of them are innocuous. Some of them are very dangerous. But it's a complex interaction between your autoimmune system and things like that. So, obviously, fire cases, significant fires, often the process of putting the fire out with water or whatever things you use often creates a very wet environment afterwards. And I've had a number of inquiries over the year over mold growth and fungal growth in these post-fire landscapes where people are buildings, where people are probably trying to recover deceased, understand the causality, and got quite significant health and safety concerns for their team and themselves in that place.
We're not going to use less water. I'm trying to argue for people to use more water. I apologise, because but this is like two conflicting things all the time. Because if we use more water, we're exposing our firefighters to less contaminant. They haven't got to be in there as long.
I think, again,
less heat exposure.
Clearly in the process,
we cause more water damage to the property.
Yeah, but I wouldn't be arguing you should use less water.
No. But this is what I'm saying, though. This is the challenge.
But the secondary challenge is with those buildings, particularly certain types of modern building where plasterboard and things like that, they're actually really, really fantastic feeding ground for some really nasty things. There's one thing called split gill, Schizophyllum commune, which is fairly common, for example, on wet hay bales, and is very common in damaged wet buildings, or it can be. And it is a known quite serious pathogen. If you've got somebody who's immunocompromised, maybe on cancer medication and other things like that, it can kill.
I spoke about my dad, COPD.
Yeah. It's nasty if it gets in. It grows in your lungs and it can kill you. So,
Mate, my head is full of little threads that I want to pull on from 1,000 other rabbit holes. I want to be respectful of that time. We first came across you before, but then, like so many of the people I've interacted with as part of the advisory boards for the Blue Light Show, these unicorns keep cropping up as real academic sort of powerhouses, and this is the way that we sort of interacted with each other. I'd be remiss if I didn't attribute some of our connection to that. Like, when you're looking at sharing some more of this information and trying to help it really penetrate into the wider sort of blue light sector, how much time do you spend doing these sort of talks and conferences, and why are you started to get involved with things like the Blue Light Show?
Because I enjoy it, for a start. I love talking about plants and science and nature and forensics. It's a fascinating and important area as far as I'm concerned. But, it is just critically, it's really important. We've touched on already lack of resourcing and awareness and capacity. And if I can promote and kind of put myself out there and talk about how my sector and my peers, such as soil scientists, archaeologists, anthropologists, entomologists, and non-human DNA specialists, can contribute to policing, national security, that is a really important thing. I'm not saying we are the solution, but there
is no solution. There's only a contributing factor of this 10% of this, 5% of that, 50% of this.
We can potentially provide, that extra really valuable insight. And so I think it's incredibly important. I've always believed, as a scientist, in all the areas of science that I've worked in across my life, that what you do is communicate your science. It's incredibly
Mate,
important.
how many academics get that wrong? Because I love academics are my favourites to have, academics, doctors, all that sort of jazz on the podcast,
Mm,
because
mm,
when you write your really rigorous,
mm,
academically structured papers, they're written for other academics because they need to be written for other academics to get into the journal of something.
mm.
But then it doesn't always become tactical, deployable, useful
Yeah,
for the originally intended audience. That's
yeah.
why, and you've been very kind holding my hand through some of these minefields of big words today, because if we can't translate it
No.
into useful information, into 7-year-old language that I can understand, then with the best of intentions in the world, I want to hear you, I want to listen to you, Mark, but I don't
Mm.
understand what it is you're asking me to do when I get there and do the thing. So I think what you've done today, and I know what you're doing, what are the topics you're going to be speaking on at the Blue Light Show?
So I'm going to be doing a presentation on forensic botany and what it can achieve and help contribute in investigations. But we're going to be having a round table discussion, if that's the term, with me chairing a group, a forensic archaeologist, naughty me, and also a emerging area of science in forensics, which is the microbiome. So it's a delightful woman called Komang Rabalitso Senior from Liverpool John Moores, and my archaeology colleague, Alistair Vannon. I keep saying anthropology or something today. Sorry.
He'll forgive you.
From Cellmark, who are one of the companies I work with a lot. And we're going to be talking about, what we can do, but also the ideas around big data. And we talked earlier on about how big data is perceived as cyber digital, but actually there are other very, very powerful things. Oh, naughty me! I forgot another specialist. My dear friend Lorna Dawson, who's one of the world's eminent and most significant forensic soil scientists, who will be joining us as well. Sorry, Lorna, forgot you for a moment.
I think that's going to be one of the most interesting talks at the show. Because
so
with
we're going to be
respect, some of the
basically
other
having
ones,
a chit chat amongst ourselves as friends about how our science and discipline areas interleave and how each thing helps make the other stronger, but can really contribute to complex challenges we face. Talking about serious crime is my area, but things around global security as well, because biological, soil, environmental mapping data is incredibly powerful data and information.
Mate, what are you coming to any food or anything afterwards? I'd love to have
I'm
a proper
always up
off
for
the thing
places
chat.
where if there's food,
Mate, let's get some food
around,
after the show, because
I'm
I'd love to keep chatting with you, and also
No.
I'm going to ask you for the names of those colleagues as well, because I'd love to have them on.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're going to be at the show in July. What I'm conscious of is people hearing this and having to wait until then, and then maybe not getting a chance to speak. If people want to reach out to you specifically, you'll probably give me some links, and we'll stick them underneath here. But what's the best place for people to go if they want to engage with you more or solicit your training and your sort of input?
So I have my own website, Mark Spencer, botanist, which is up there, which actually I've got to do a bit of work on. It's slightly broken, but you could contact me through that.
Okay.
So
we'll put those underneath this. If people look underneath here, we'll put the website link, and we'll make sure it's evidently aware for people. But
obviously, we're internally within, I can't see because we're not allowed to promote it, but I'm actually National Crime Agency. I'm on their expert list.
Why not allowed to promote it?
No, this is really weird. They've got a rule now, which is if you're an expert on the National Crime Expert, you're not allowed to business promote yourself on it. So we have to weirdly signal to police.
I want you to come and work with us because
example.
you're a recognised expert that goes around training people. But as soon as you're in my little club, you're not allowed to promote yourself anymore.
Yeah.
Well,
it's a bit odd. It's a bit odd because
that's naughty and unnecessary.
And it
My word's not yours, but
it's we do often do some quite significant work through the NCA. But it's odd, so I'm not allowed to put it on my website and things like that.
Well, I can say it. Mark's the #1 global botany expert, and if you want some more advice, go and speak to Mark because no one else knows anything, and even the government wants to speak to him because he knows all the stuff.
Yeah. I mean, me and my we operate, again, people think, oh, you're a scientist and, you're in your labs or whatever. I'm very much rapid response. We pride ourselves in our little tiny sector on, if there's a phone call from a force saying we got a body, I will be there in half an hour if I can get there. Because you can't be going, I'm terribly sorry, I'm doing my hair.
How's Thursday?
It's not, yeah. So it's really, in 15 years, the only time I've ever said no, once was because I was on holiday abroad, and the other was because I was already on a case somewhere else. Those are the only times.
Well, don't be setting yourself on fire just to keep everybody warm, mate. But I really do appreciate you sacrificing a couple of hours. Jesus, we've been going for an hour and a half already. I really appreciate you taking the time this morning and coming on for a chat. I really look forward to seeing you in July. If people want to go and find some more information, have a look under here. And I really appreciate you, brother. That was absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, and actually, there's a YouTube thing as well. I can send that for you. There's
Stick it in there.
Talking about, yammering on about all of this stuff as well. So
absolutely, brother. Appreciate you.
Yeah, it's no problem.
Well, that's it for today, folks. Hope you took a lot away from that episode. We started the Firefighters podcast to develop, inspire, connect, motivate, represent, and most importantly, celebrate the world of incredible emergency services operators and the wider sector through this series of wide-ranging conversations. We really love creating this podcast and bringing it to so many people. Did you know you can also find these on YouTube? We do a lot of video podcasts now. You can head over to our YouTube page and follow, subscribe there. And as a final ask from us, whatever platform you're on, please rate the podcast. It really helps us as a key performance indicator to reach more and more people. I've been your host, Pete Wakefield. This has been the Firefighters Podcast. And wherever you are in the world, please stay safe, be happy, and where possible, please remember and support your firefighters and first responders. I'll see you next time.